Look, if you want to create thousands of jobs and pay for new hospitals, new schools, better roads, free up the room for lower taxes, like guess what's paying for the bills, right? Major natural resource projects like pipelines, right? If you're against pipelines, like come over to Alberta and talk to the thousands of people who are going to have to go home to their spouse and talk about how they're going to have to cancel Christmas.
This is the Canadian Taxpayers Federation podcast where we are fighting for lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government. My name's Chris Sims. I'm the Alberta director for the CTF. I'm here with my good friend and federal director, Franco Terrazzano. Franco, you're actually on the road right now, which accounts for your different backdrop. The natural light actually suits you quite well. You're in Toronto, correct?
I am. Yeah, I'm in Toronto, speaking at a conference here. We got some budding journalist students who want to learn some of the tips of the trade, tricks of the trade. So we're going to be telling them, how to actually not believe what politicians are saying, but to show what politicians are actually doing. So the title of the talk is Digging Up Government Waste and Cutting Through Politician Spin.
I love that. He might have mentioned it to me at length over the phone, the entire thing, and the speech sounds amazing, folks. So, Franco, we got a lot going on this week, lots of things happening. I wanted to highlight two things. One, I wanted to highlight Premier Danielle Smith's game of chess with Prime Minister Mark Carney over the so-called Nation Building Office, which is supposed to give you rapid approval of projects. And two, we're going to touch on the Alberta teachers strike, which is brewing here in Alberta. So let's start first with energy. It's very national. So something happened this week. It was so interesting. I will admit, I was a little nervous. I was starting to hear things like, oh, like the government could be building a pipeline, which is not what we want to happen because it wastes
No.
billions of taxpayers' money. Then they did this. So, Prime Minister Mark Carney has got this like nation building office. I was that getting a lot of buzz in Ottawa
Oh yeah,
back.
big time. Everyone's talking about the major projects office.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of buzz. Another bureaucracy, it looks like, to some extent, for sure.
Yeah, and so they're not known for actually getting stuff done and moving things along quickly. So it goes something like this. We've got the major projects office, and he called it a nation building project. And he said, hey, all that needs to happen is an applicant needs to apply to do something like, for example, build a pipeline. No problem. And we'll, make sure all the checks and balances are all there and Bob's your uncle. There's your rubber stamp, is kind of what he said. What's interesting is that no private company is super keen to leave their wallet on our park bench here in Canada anymore. So private companies are looking at Canada's regulatory system and all these laws that we have against pipelines, against tankers, all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, maybe no. We don't feel like maybe blowing billions of dollars for nothing. So what Premier Danielle Smith did was this. She said, okay, Alberta is now the applicant. The province of Alberta, we're now the applicant, meaning they're going to spend $14 million of taxpayers' money, which I'm not thrilled about, on all the paperwork and regulatory red tape and like the initial consultation and stuff to basically get it ready for a green light. And then it's up to Carney to give the green light or not. We actually haven't talked about this directly yet. What did you think about this move?
Huh. What did I think about this move? Well, first, Chris, it was kind of sadness. Like, look at the state of our country where all this has to happen just in the hopes to get something built, right? And like, we shouldn't even be having this conversation, right? We should have never gotten to this point. And the whole reason we're here is because Ottawa keeps getting in the way, right? It's like so hard for a business to actually build and develop Canada's natural resources and employ Canadian energy workers that now all of this is taking place, right? So Ottawa has to get out of the way. And the Impact Assessment Act. Okay, that's the No More Pipelines and Major Projects law that you probably heard of, right? Get rid of the discriminatory tanker ban on the West Coast, right? How about the cap on oil and gas production? What is that going to lead to? Like 40,000 fewer jobs, right? Get rid of the industrial carbon tax, the second or hidden carbon tax through fuel regulations, right? Think about the time when the federal government moved the regulatory goalposts on the Energy East pipeline, rejected the Northern Gateway pipeline. So you asked me what I thought about it, of all this going on. And the first thing that gets in my mind is like, Look, we don't need a new bureaucracy from Ottawa. We don't need a new office from Ottawa. We don't need more bureaucrats. What we need is Ottawa to get out of the way.
Exactly. And yet here we are. And it was one of those things you could see the frustration on Premier Smith's face when she made this announcement. I did find it interesting. I don't know who thought of this, of okay, your move. Like, and she even said, this is a test. This is a test of the system that was all ballyhooed and having the major projects office, and this is going to be the panacea to all of our problems. And with nobody coming up to be a candidate, to be an applicant, she's like, all right, here's your test. Will you deny the province of Alberta a green light to build a pipeline? Which, and I was listening very carefully to this presser, which Smith has said on the record, they are not going to spend taxpayers' money to build another pipeline. That is not in the cards. We will hold the Alberta government to
Yeah.
that. So that's a big difference. It's frustrating, Franco, because we've seen the results of this movie before on what has happened. You were just mentioning all these different pipelines that were said no to. Of course, we have other major resources projects, different types of mines that have been shut down and said no to. We've got such a perfect example with the Kinder Morgan pipeline, which runs from Edmonton out to Burnaby. It's a private company, and they got kind of pretend green lights from the government for years and years, and they're bleeding money and they still haven't been able to twin their own property. All of a sudden, the private company walked away, threw its hands in the air, and then taxpayers were stuck with this crazy bill to build this thing. We can't have this happen again because we don't have the money to pay for this stuff from the government, right?
Well, it's not only that the government is broke, but also government shouldn't be taking taxpayers' money to give to any corporation,
Correct.
right? That shouldn't happen in the first place. And like, look, let me first just like make the case for why we need pipelines and why we need to be able to develop our natural resources here in Canada. Look, if you want to create thousands of jobs and pay for new hospitals, new schools, better roads, free up the room for lower taxes, like, guess what's paying for the bills, right? Major natural resource projects like pipelines,
Yeah.
right? So if you're out there blocking pipelines, opposing development, well, you're opposing good paying jobs for so many people, right? Thousands of jobs, right? If you're against pipelines, like, come over to Alberta and talk to thousands of people who are going to have to go home to their spouse and talk about how they're going to have to cancel Christmas. And the reason I bring that up is because I remember what it was like in Alberta from about the end of 2014 all the way till I was shipped out to Ottawa, right?
Hmm.
A handful of years ago. And I remember how hard it was. And I remember hearing countless of stories. And, we were mentioned Premier Smith. Well, I remember one of those years I was listening to then the Danielle Smith show on 770. And I remember a caller called into the show and told Danielle, the host at the day, right, that this was the worst day of his life because he had to just lay off a bunch of his buddies. And now they had to go home and tell their wives that Christmas is canceled. I remember listening to that segment and like, it was hard to like keep the tears back, right? Like, these are the real life struggles of what happens when you have ideologues, politicians, governments roadblocking development. I remember being in an Uber and I was talking to this guy and he told me that he used to be a geologist, right? And he was the main breadwinner for his family. So now he was working Uber, nothing wrong with that, but he was also forced to work another job and still was having a very difficult time even coming close to make ends meet. So this is the reality. When you have politicians, activists, government bureaucrats who oppose major natural resource development, how about you go look those people in the eyes who are going to have a hard time paying their natural gas bills and making Christmas happen for their families.
Covering their mortgage. I'm
Covering
a
their
Gen X
mortgage.
kid, born in the 70s, raised in the 80s in Western Canada. I'll put it this way. All of the men in my family were tradesmen, and a lot of them worked in the oil patch. So when that national energy program came through, it affected a lot of people and it affected a lot of families. So
And
Canada has,
Chris,
yeah, give her.
let me add another point, right? Because I think that was the one reason why we need these natural resource projects, right?
It is.
To create jobs, to make sure people can put food on their table, right? But there's another reason too, and we're the Taxpayers Federation, so let's talk about the taxpayer impact, right? If you want new hospitals, if you want lower class sizes, better roads, if you want the government to, be able to lower taxes, these are the projects that help pay for that. And if you're against these projects, you might as well tell average Canadians that their tax bills are going to have to go through the roof. Because if the governments aren't getting the tax revenue from these natural resource projects, guess who's going to be left holding the bag? It's going to be average Canadian workers. Okay, let me give you a couple examples. So, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we calculated that between what was it, 2013 and 2023, taxpayers will lose out on like $12 billion just because of the differential that we are taking a lower price selling our oil, not exclusively, but almost exclusively to the US rather than getting world prices. A $12 billion hit. Okay, 12 brand new hospitals that never got built. Or you know what? I hear Premier David Eby in BC talking a lot about pipelines. Well, guess what? If you just look at the natural resource revenue in British Columbia, so not the corporate income tax, not income tax, just natural resource revenue. If you were to shut all that down tomorrow, that's more than 6,000 teachers gone.
That's a perfect example. It really is. And I really hope people make this connection. There was a crazy number. It was a bunch of economists had worked it out, and I think it was since 2015 until around now. And they estimated that due to heavy regulation, either stopped, slowed down, or strangled, that Canada has lost out on around $600 billion in lost natural resources projects. Now, that wasn't just pipelines. That was pretty much everything put up in a nutshell.
And that's only over 10 years.
That's
It was
staggering.
$670 billion since 2015, right?
Wild.
On stalled or canceled major natural resource projects. Poof, gone.
I did the math on that one, and if you add that amount, the 670 billion, plus the $20 billion that the parliamentary budget officer was saying that is going to get blown a hole in our economy because of the cap on energy production. They call it an emissions cap, but it's really a production cap. So you add those two numbers, the 670 plus the 20 billion, that worked out to the federal income taxes paid for every man, woman, and child in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba for 10 years. That's how much in taxes we would be otherwise paying. Like, it was mind-boggling. So it's really important that people drill down on this stuff. Speaking of drilling down, we have a couple of clips for you. Franco mentioned Premier David Eby. We're going to hear from him in a second because all of a sudden he sounds super different than he did during the federal election. Super weird that he's sounding super different now because he's saying there will be no tankers on our pristine coastline. More on that in a minute. First, let's listen to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith explaining why she is putting Ottawa to the test.
And this is a test of whether Canada works as a country. Because if we can't build with collaboration of the federal government and between provinces, if it's everybody gets to get their products going to market except Alberta, that's not a country. A country is one where we support each other. And I think Canadians are there, and I hope that we can get more and more politicians to get there too.
Once again, that was Smith just the other day saying, you know what? Yeah, this is a test because y'all said during the election that you're all of a sudden in favor of pipelines and big projects and build, baby, build, and let's get it happening. And I'm going to make sure that you actually do that. So put your money where your mouth is. So that's Premier Danielle Smith. And lo and behold, moments after Smith has finished talking, British Columbia Premier David Eby, the same guy who eventually caved on the consumer carbon tax, which was a miracle. Okay, good job, tax fighters in BC, making him blink on that one. But he was also making noise about, oh, well, maybe, we could maybe loosen things up. He was saying all the right things during the federal election. Now listen to him.
To put that tanker ban at threat, it's not just a threat to our pristine coast that so many British Columbians, including myself, value, but it is a direct economic threat to the kind of economy that we're trying to build in the country here. And so when I've said, let's cross that bridge when we come to it, we'll see what the Premier comes up with, I'm being polite. I am being polite. There is no project. There is no bridge to cross unless the Albertan government and the federal Canadian government are committing billions of taxpayer dollars to build this project. And if that is the plan, then they should be transparent about it. Don't mistake my politeness for weakness on protecting our economy and our coast.
Okay, so a few things there. Franco, you spent time in British Columbia. You know how beautiful it is, right?
Beautiful. Yeah, I used to live in Coquitlam for a little while.
Yeah, so it's gorgeous. The thing is that it's not Eden. Like, it is a busy, commercial, industrial, teeming port city. Even in Vancouver, there's massive ports off of that west coast. And all up the coast, there's tons of industry all up the coast. They ship stuff off the west coast all the time. So what do you make of his term, our pristine coastline?
Well, it's just politics. It's just politics, right? And, speaking of politics, I want to come back to the major projects office that the Carney
Okay,
government set up. Sorry, Chris, but I really want to nail this point home because, look, if the major projects office was just some way to essentially get rid of regulations and just allow projects to get built, if that's all it was, I'd be like, still doesn't make sense, but okay. But here's the problem with the major projects office. Number one, the real problem is not politicians and bureaucrats, not enough of them, right? The real problem is that you have these politicians and bureaucrats that layered on regulation after regulation after regulation that make it nearly impossible to attract large-scale investment to build these large-scale natural resource projects. So if you wanted to fix that problem and encourage investment across the board, across all sectors, you would get rid of those regulations, right? Instead, the Carney government has set up this kind of new bureaucracy where these politicians and bureaucrats are going to pretend like they know a couple projects that they think is in the national interest. Well, number one, politicians and bureaucrats have no idea what project is truly in the national interest. Okay? Like that is such an obscure term. And really, they just use it to cover to, pick these projects and not pick other projects. But also think about what they're doing if they're going to pick, relatively few projects that get the green light. So you have some projects that will be allowed to get built, hopefully, in theory. We'll see if it actually happens. But then every other different type of investment will still have to deal with the over regulatory burden that was already there, right? So if you really wanted to solve the problem, you wouldn't create a new government office staffed with more government bureaucrats. You would get rid of the onerous regulations that were making it hard to attract investment in the first place.
exactly. How about you reduce the bit of traffic that's on the highway instead of telling me that your high-speed passing lane is chock full of more vehicles, which is what they're doing here. Last time I checked, adding more bureaucrats to something or another layer of bureaucracy or another office does the opposite of speeding things up. Like, and also, it's not a mystery what the problem is. You just finished listing them, okay? The C-69 and the no more tankers ban and the energy cap and the industrial carbon tax. These are all things that Ottawa has heard every single day, okay? Especially from the province of Alberta. So they know the problem, but instead they're just layering on more of an office. So I thought it was really important to highlight that stuff. Did you want me to switch over to teachers now?
Yeah,
You
give
good?
her, Chris. Yeah, let's go.
All right. So this is happening in Alberta, but one of the main reasons why we're talking about it on the national show is because these things have a way of spreading. And it's really important to pay attention to them because it could be affecting your province at any moment. Here's the situation. We have around 51,000 teachers who are teaching in government schools in Alberta. They had a huge strike vote of, yes, let's reject our current contract offer. Let's go out on the picket line. It was like 89.5%. That is a big strike vote, okay? Here's the thing. The Alberta government was offering teachers a 12% pay increase over 4 years, so 3% per year. They were also offering to hire 3,000 new teachers plus 1,500 new classroom assistants. If they had asked us, we would have told the Alberta government, that's too generous. We don't have the money for this. Why are you making this big, crazy offer? But the teachers said no anyway. And so now we're in this huge moment of upheaval where we've got like 700,000 kids that won't be in class. So we've got like hundreds of thousands of parents scrambling right now to find childcare and a place to put their kid. I wanted to ask you, like, you've gone through labor fights here in Alberta before. Relatively speaking, it looks like government employees are pretty well paid here in this province.
Nice. Yeah. Way to undersell it. Hey, yeah. No, I mean, like we used to call it when I was the folks. I don't know if you guys remember this, but I used to be the Alberta director before I was shipped off to Mordor, and we used to call it the Alberta bureaucrat premium. It's actually nuts. Like, I feel like if you haven't really dove into Alberta's books, I think there's like this like narrative that Alberta is fiscally responsible, like on the spending side, but it's not.
No.
In fact, like Alberta has like typically spent like crazy. I would say like drunken sailors, but I tend to like drunken sailors.
Me too.
They seem like a good time. No, but look, I remember when I was there, there was a big the nurses were the ones who was kind of going toe to toe with the government. So I remember that, and they were paid extremely well, right? And like, look, like I think you really made a good point why it's important for everyone to look at this because here's what happens, folks, with these government union negotiations. You'll have one government union go, like the teachers, and then they'll get a big raise. And then there's other unions within that province. Let's say, I'm just saying hypothetically here, you might have the nurses, you might have the actual bureaucrats in departments. Then they'll point to that negotiation, say, well, you just gave them a raise. Now we need a raise. And then what happens? Not done there. Then the municipal government bureaucrats would be like, hold on, you just gave those bureaucrats a raise. Where's our money? And then it gets even worse because then you'll have like other provincial bureaucrats be like, well, hold on a second. Those guys got a raise. Where's ours? And the same thing kind of trickles out all throughout Canada. So I think it's actually really important for people to kind of look on what's going on here in Alberta and this the fight between the teachers and the province, because this actually does impact not just your provincial government, your municipal government, but it could also impact private sector unions as well, right? Increase costs, make life more expensive. So we have to keep an eye on this. Chris, let me turn the table around here and ask you a question because I saw how Smith responded, and I thought it was quite strategic. So why don't you let us know what's going on there?
Yeah, for sure. So very quickly, just so people know what the offer was, and that we're not just saying, oh, well, you're paid, 20,000 a year. That's too much. No, no. The offer they turned down, so it's a dead offer, okay? The offer they turned down was you got a 4-year undergrad, like a regular degree from Teachers College. You're starting at $71,000 a year.
Wait, what?
I know. Starting.
The starting salary after was 71?
Fresh as a daisy.
Salary. And that's just salary too, right? We know salary is just the tip of the iceberg when you're talking about bureaucrat pay.
Big time. So fresh as a daisy, 22 years old, picture yourself fresh at a teacher's college, man, and you're starting at 71,000 plus
and it's
benefits.
Alberta, cost of living as well. Yeah.
This is it. We've got relatively lower income taxes. We got no sales tax. Our housing is way cheaper in most places. Yeah. It was one of those things where because of the grid change that they proposed, it was going to make Alberta teachers the highest paid in Western Canada. And they said no, which is why I'm actually kind of dumbfounded. I don't know why they did this, but Smith's response was smart. So Taxpayers Federation, we came out right away and said, hey, we should do this. And to be fair, they jumped on it so quick. They were probably planning on doing this anyway. But Smith said, okay, we're going to take the money that we otherwise would have used to pay teachers' salaries, and we're going to give it to parents. We're going to pay parents back with it. So if you are a parent of a student who is otherwise locked out of a government school and the child is under 12, meaning they can't be left home alone, $30 per student per day for the duration of this strike. So I thought that was a really smart play. Usually it's like, oh, government handing out money isn't great, but think of it this way. These parents pay through their taxes for the schools to be open and the teachers to be at work. If that job ain't getting done, you better believe you should be getting a refund.
Yeah, no, I think you said it well, Chris. I have nothing else to add. Like, I do think it's strategic and like, yeah, I mean, I don't really believe that taxes go for services. A lot of time, I think your tax dollars gets wasted and you never really get it back, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
But look, I mean, I do agree. Like, education is a huge part of the budget, huge part of the tax dollars parents are paying. Like, what are they paying for if the teachers aren't at work?
I have to give him credit. Our boss, Todd, he gave me a good analogy because he used to work in cement. He was like, yeah, if I'm paying you to bring a truckload of cement to fill my driveway, and I've already paid you and you don't bring the cement, I'm getting my money back. Yeah.
That's a
That was
good
a
way of
good
putting
way
it.
of, I thought that was a good way of putting it. I just wanted to touch on a couple of quick things in regards to teachers. And again, this will affect like the rest of the country as well. So again, they were offering 12% over 4 years. A starting salary, the one they rejected, was going to be $71,000 per
That's
year.
insane.
I know you put in, I think it was 8 years or
But it's
so.
not even a year though. It's not even a full year.
I know.
Like, are we just gonna let that pass?
This is the
Like,
thing. I know they've got summers off and there's all these pro D days and there's all these different days that, they're not in class, right? So it's one of those situations where they're saying, and now they're coming out and saying, well, it's not the money. Okay, I'm just going to give them some quick communications advice. Okay. If it's not the money, you can't be cute. You can't be coy. You can't just say, oh, it's classroom complexity. Nobody knows what that means. Okay. If there's something that's going on in your classrooms and you need the government to fix it without money, because it's not about the money, you have to tell them clearly, because they're not mind
yeah.
readers. Government's usually terrible at most things. They won't be able to figure it out unless you hold their hand. So if there's something going on in your classroom, teachers, and I'm talking to the good ones out there, you have to speak up. You have to push back against your union that voted 89.5% against this huge pay raise. And you need to tell people what is going on and what sort
And
of changes you need.
hey, Chris, it's not about the money thing is actually kind of hilarious because this isn't my first time. Like I've been in quite a few, as the CTF spokesperson,
It's not your first rodeo, as they
battling.
say
Yeah,
here.
it's not my first rodeo. Battling some bureaucrats, right? And I've heard this so many times. It's not about the money. They go to it's not about the money once the public realizes how overpaid they are. Like, oh, it's not about the money. That's always the natural progression of things. Is once the dollar figure gets presented, there's their next talking point. Well, if it really wasn't about the money, and look, I'm not privy to the conversations. I'm not at the negotiating room. I don't know, but I bet it's a pretty good bet that the union isn't proposing freezes or pay cuts.
Nope,
I
doubt
I
it.
bet that's a pretty good bet, right? So maybe it is a little bit about that taxpayer cash.
It just might be. All right. Thank you so much for the discussion. Do you want to go to our taxpayer pro tips?
Yeah, let's go. Can I start with mine?
Yeah, give her.
So here's my taxpayer pro tip, and it goes out to our people, right? Because look, I think it's fair to say that during the election, Carney at least tried, and I would say he was successful in selling Canadian voters, the ones who voted for him, that he's got a minority government now. Carney wanted to sell Canadians on this idea that he was different than Justin Trudeau. When it comes to the debt, he is different than Justin Trudeau. He seems to be worse, right? So Carney, over 4 years, is planning to add what $255 billion to the debt. Over those same years, Trudeau is planning to add $131 billion to the debt. So let that sink in. Carney is planning on adding almost twice as much to the debt over 4 years, those same 4 years, as what even Trudeau is planning. Okay, so look, these are the numbers. They aren't my numbers, right? Government's own independent watchdogs numbers. So, if you're talking to someone and they're like, yeah, I think Carney's going to be a good manager of our finances. Look, maybe, I don't know. Maybe things will change. Maybe pigs are going to start flying. Don't see that yet. But just remind them, folks, that the numbers are the numbers, right? If you want Carney to be more fiscally responsible than Trudeau, and I think we all do, well, then just remind your friends, your family, like, folks, at this current moment, Carney is planning to borrow more money than what even Trudeau planned.
I still can't quite accept that. And I literally work in this field. Like when you first told me that was happening, I was like, stop it. I thought you were
Crazy.
pulling my leg. It's crazy. And then, sorry, off the top of your head, when's budget day? Have they set a date or have they just said November?
November 4th. It's our Super Bowl.
It is our Super Bowl. This is so much fun. Okay, my taxpayer pro tip, first off the top, again, to the teachers, Premier Danielle Smith is buying some snow boots and she's digging her heels in on this thing. So if you're hitting the picket lines, I don't think she's budging on this, especially the money. So if you're hitting the picket lines, should probably go shopping for some snow boots because you're going to be out there for a while. Mostly because we don't have the money. Here in Alberta, we've got a debt on track to have one, $84.3 billion. Okay, cupboard's bare. Every single dollar that Smith was able to give more to you will be borrowed plus interest, and it's your students, it's your kids that are going to be paying that back. So it's not in there. Second, I wanted to highlight this quickly for folks listening in the East. If you're living on Cape Breton Island, okay, and you are a licensed legal firearms owner, and you own one of the firearms that is now on the banned list that the federal government is coming after, very quick, don't panic, okay? You still have 1 year of amnesty. The feds are waiting for a year until October 2026. Second, you can contact the Canadian Taxpayers Federation if you're on Cape Breton Island and you own one of these firearms legally. You can contact us at our website, taxpayer.com, and you can get free legal advice on what to do next. Franco, thank you so much for the day today. Good luck in Toronto.
I'll need it.
You'll do great. All right, folks, remember to like and share this video, and especially share this one with people who need to hear this message, because we're always fighting for taxpayers.